An API key is a unique identifier used to connect to or perform an API call. API keys can be used to either access your application without any principal identity or to create secondary credentials so that you could send requests on behalf of a specific user. In the first approach, API keys will be useful for accessing public data anonymously and will be used to associate API requests with your project. In the latter approach, API keys will represent secondary credentials of users that have the same or lower access rights, depending on the defined scope. These two variants are not supposed to be used interchangeably. Whether you should use the former or the latter approach greatly depends on what your application needs. For example, if you're building a SaaS product where customers can create their own projects and you would like to expose a mechanism that lets users interact with those projects on behalf of a third-party tool anonymously, then you should likely choose the first variant where API keys can be used without any principal and are simply tied to specific projects. However, if you're building a social network application, or let's say something similar to GitHub, it may be beneficial to let users create their own API keys, which will allow them to build custom apps that interact with your application's API, but without using your front-end application. Essentially, a user could generate an API key that can be used from a third-party tool, which will allow them to access user-specific information or perform actions on behalf of that user. Such an API key could have a specific set of scopes, and the user could control what exactly can be accessed through that specific API key. If you've worked with GitHub, Stripe, or other SDKs that offer API keys, this all should sound familiar. But if not, don't worry, we'll be diving into everything in much more detail, and it should all make sense soon. In these next few lessons, we're choosing to implement the second variant as we already have the user entity in place. But just so you're aware, implementing the first approach should be almost identical to what we're about to do, so don't worry if you're interested in implementing or learning about that first approach.